Well, thank you, Alistair, and greetings to my fellow panelists. It's a real pity that I can't be there with you and have some of that Moldovan wine, and I can feel the energy there in the room, even from a distance. I was really sorry that things didn't work out earlier this month, and that the original event was canceled. And I want to extend my very personal and heartfelt condolences to the people of Greece for the losses that I know they have endured the last few weeks, first from the wildfires and now from the flooding. But I'm happy to be able to be with you virtually. Nectaria had asked if I would say a few words about the U.S. perspective on recent geopolitical dynamics, and in particular on the diplomacy, the new diplomacy between Turkey and Greece, the outlook for Sweden and NATO, and the situation with respect to European energy security. So let me just say a few words about each of those subjects in turn. First of all, I was encouraged, as I'm sure all of us were, to read about the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mitsotakis and President Erdogan that took place in New York a few days ago. I think the fact that this meeting occurred at all shows just how much the temperature is changing in Greek-Turkish relations since even a year ago, much less 3 or 4 years ago. My understanding is that there is an agreed roadmap, that there's a basic approach, which is to start with the most attainable objects and confidence building, and then build on that foundation over time. Of course, I think we all know we have to manage expectations, but I see grounds for cautious optimism. You have a leadership in both countries that is coming off of recent electoral victories, and so I think we'll be able to direct their attention outward with some confidence. In Turkey's case, I think there's a very specific need for a new approach. There's an economic need that acts as a real impetus to re-engage. The Turkish economy is in bad shape. Turkey needs investment. Turkey needs economic diversification. And that requires not just different economic and monetary policies in Turkey, but a different foreign policy. I think Turkey became somewhat isolated over the last few years, not just in the Eastern Mediterranean and in relations with the West more generally, but in the Middle East and in its immediate neighborhood. It seems like the Turks are working to change that. They're reaching out not only to Greece, but to Israel, to UAE, to others. The other factor that is encouraging is, of course, the growing strength and confidence of Greece as a regional actor. The economic recovery in that country is quite remarkable, and Greece is attracting renewed investment. It's becoming a major energy hub. And you also have to acknowledge the diplomatic factor. I think Greece has been very astute in cultivating good ties with its neighbors in the last few years. The momentum of PRESPA remains quite significant, I think, and to see Greece reaching out to Albania and Bulgaria, engaging with Israel, Libya, the Arab states, this has to be acknowledged and is quite something to watch. There is another factor that has been mentioned already, and that is the heightened engagement of the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean these last few years. And it was a privilege for me in my time at State Department to contribute in some small way to that. The U.S.-Greek strategic dialogue, the 3+1 format, the increased U.S. military presence in Suda Bay and Larissa, the normalization of U.S. security ties with Cyprus, which I think was long overdue. All of that helps to create a favorable environment, a more stable security environment where local diplomacy can have a better chance of succeeding. So I think there's clearly an opening for Greece and Turkey. The challenges are not small. We know them very well. Cyprus, the Aegean, migration has been mentioned. But you know, if someone had told you a year ago that Japan and South Korea would find a breakthrough in spite of some very painful historical problems, you would have thought that was impossible. So even if the result of the engagement between Greece and Turkey is just to ratchet down tensions and create some room for collaboration for collaboration, some less friction than before. I think that alone would be very meaningful. The second issue that I was asked to speak about is NATO enlargement. Um, 6 months ago, I would have predicted, if somebody had asked me, I would have predicted that Turkey by now would have already dropped its objections to both Finland and Sweden joining NATO. I thought after the presidential elections, and certainly by the time of the Vilnius summit, that would have happened. And of course, it did happen in the case of Finland. The holdup on Sweden is a bit puzzling from my perspective. I think it's increasingly clear that a middleman position between Russia and the West is not really a viable course for Turkey any longer. Putin is an albatross. His regime is showing some real cracks. The Russians are opening up overland routes that will allow them to bypass the Bosporus. And I would keep in mind that Turkey would be a net beneficiary from Nordic enlargement. This is often not mentioned. But from what I can see, looking at a map, bringing Finland and Sweden into NATO would increase the pressure on Russia's northwestern military frontier, and that inevitably forces Russia to divert more attention towards the north and away from the Black Sea, which benefits Turkey. But a final point on that, I think Turkey has now gotten quite a lot of concessions on the enlargement issue. If you go back to last year, to the Madrid summit, and you look at the Turkish demands, the demands that were made as a precondition to approving Sweden, from what I can see, those have been met. Sweden has lifted restrictions on arms sales. The Swedish parliament has amended its anti-terrorism laws. NATO has set up a special coordinator for terrorism, which was a real win for Turkey. And of course, the United States, the U.S. administration has signaled a willingness to move forward with selling Turkey F-16s. The Congress has stipulated, of course, that won't happen unless Turkey ratifies Swedish membership, accession to NATO, and reduces tensions with Greece. On the first of those conditions, there's an open path for Turkey to accept the concessions that Sweden has made if it chooses to do so. On the second one, I think things are improving as a result of the thaw between Ankara and Athens. So an optimistic view would be that all of that certainly seems to suggest we're on the right trajectory. Let's see what happens later in October after the Turkish General Assembly has been in session. But there's ample space for Turkey to approve Sweden and move on, and it would benefit from it. I think we have a shared interest in keeping Turkey in the Western ambit as much as we can, but I think it would be a mistake for Turkey to overplay its hand on this. The final thing that I was asked to touch on is the issue of energy security. And the big news here, of course, is that the Ukraine war has really transformed the landscape in the Eastern Mediterranean. The prospects for gas from that region to really have a measurable impact on Europe's effort at diversification. For a long time, the standard view on this has been that gas from the Eastern Mediterranean simply wasn't commercially viable because of the glut of Russian gas in Europe. And that's gone now. Nord Stream 2 is gone. The EU needs more gas. It needs more gas from nearby politically stable sources, and there aren't many of those. Greece is becoming, as I mentioned a moment ago, a major energy hub for Europe. U.S. LNG imports to Greece and Turkey are at all-time highs. So I think there's a lot of room for creativity, the recent exploration of sources in the region. It's a crowded region where everybody bumps up against everyone else. And so it's hard to imagine a durable arrangement that involves only a couple of parties in that region, because virtually everyone has some sort of veto power over what everyone else does. And I don't know how that will develop, but I would just close with these two thoughts. First, I think the role of government is to provide stability in which business can operate. And that's especially important in energy because of the impact that it has on our societies. And that's why I think the U.S. presence in the Eastern Mediterranean is so crucially important. I think that presence is likely to prove durable over the long term. A stable Eastern Mediterranean is a prerequisite of sorts, in my view, to European stability, which in turn allows the United States to deal more effectively with the challenge from China. And second, I think the current situation should provide clarity about the ranking of our priorities in Western politics. To my mind, the goal of reducing carbon emissions cannot be placed ahead of the goal of basic security. So the days when the European Union could pursue aggressive decarbonization based on an assumption of an endless supply of kind of cheap Russian gas that would create a bridge to renewables is over. So I think the European Union has a role to play in providing a level of support and incentives that would make the Eastern Mediterranean gas more viable, a greater willingness than it has in the past when it had more abundant options than it now has. So I think from both the U.S. and from the European perspective, there is a window of opportunity in the region, and there are a lot of trends that are much more favorable in the Eastern Mediterranean than they were even a few years ago, and so it's our job to make the most of those opportunities. Thanks for having me.